Everyone. Thanks for joining our Place Brand Masterclass or webinar. We have an hour together. Excited to chat with all of you. And what we'll go through today is really understanding and discussing the evolution of place brand strategy, and a few tips to get it right for your community, for your destination, and for your region. I see there are a couple hands that are raised. Oh, chat is disabled. Tom, can you maybe enable the chat?
Sure.
So my name is Jeremie Feinblatt. I lead the strategy practice at Resonance. I'm based in New York. We work all over the world. In a few seconds, we'll introduce what we do. Before, it would be great to know who's on this webinar. So if you don't mind going to polev.com/resonance, or just use your phone to copy this QR code, and just to get an understanding of where you all work, whether you're in destination and DMO or economic development, chamber, city organization, a consultant, an agency, or other. Let's take a couple minutes for you to fill this up. The website is polev.com/resonance. You should have it in the chat. All right, so we have about a third of consultants, 20% DMO, 13% city, 10% chambers. There are two hands that are up, Marisa and Stephen. Do you want to ask a question in the chat? Otherwise, we'll get started. Well, welcome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We've about 55 minutes. Hopefully, we'll sort the chat between now and the Q&A session. But what we'll discuss is really the evolution of place branding from a discipline around marketing to the strategic asset for destination alignment. We'll share some few tips on how we can create and how you can create an impactful place brand for your community, whether this is a large, diverse region, whether this is a district, whether this is a city. And most importantly, discuss how you can make it last. Creating a brand and defining the strategy is the first step of a long-term process. So 5 rules of place brand management to ensure that your brand is impactful in the long term. Couple words on Resonance. We have an international team in destination strategy, destination development, economic development, and obviously place branding. All of our team members and all of our work is really centered around defining strategies, defining brands, defining campaigns that help cities, communities, regions, countries attract talent, investment, and visitors. The lens with which we do this is really looking at how we can make places or help places be more livable, more prosperous, but also, and this is very important when we talk about place branding, more lovable. And the winning factor is really the combination and the intersection of livability, prosperity, and lovability. And a lot of the methodology and tools that we use is really looking at this intersection. We're fortunate to work with some really interesting destinations that have had great opportunities and great challenges to reclaim or own a new narrative, define their vision, define a tourism strategy and economic development strategy, whether it's here in the US, where I'm based, in Canada, where a lot of our team is based, or in Europe and around the world. So place branding today. There's been a strong evolution of the discipline in the past 20 years. You know, place branding as it is understood really started in the early 2000s. And initially, this was led mostly by DMOs around destination attraction, visitor attraction campaigns. We like to call this the destination marketing era. It was driven by DMOs to attract visitors. One great example is obviously Pure Michigan. This was one of the most successful platforms for destination marketing. The next decade, 2010, is really where a lot of, especially in Europe, organizations merged between economic development and tourism. These became destination marketing organizations. As you know, the decade was really around understanding and leveraging the growing alignment between what makes a destination attractive for visitors, what makes a destination attractive for talent and for businesses. So 2010s is really what we call around aligned programs. It's not a tourism campaign. It's not an economic development campaign. A big realization that success of a destination comes by bringing these different organizations together and creating a unified messaging. Right now, we're in a new era. It's not so much about attracting visitors or attracting talent or attracting businesses as it is to attracting them and making them stay. And destination branding is as much around attraction that it is around retention. And when we look at destination branding today, some of the terms we use, we would have never used in the past decade, or even less in the 2000s. We talk about supporting export. Exports is 10% of the US GDP, 35% in European countries. So destination branding is a tool to support exports. Destination branding is a tool, is an employer branding tool to support HR initiatives. So we call this the era of aligned vision, aligned action. And it's not so much about creating an external facing message as it is to ensuring consistency with our different stakeholders, to ensure that that message is met, delivered, and ultimately helps overall economic growth for the region. So destination branding today is really not so much about marketing as it is around destination appeal, internal alignment, talent attraction, export support, community and citizen pride, growing productivity as well, ensuring you attract the right people for the right jobs. And destination branding, the mindset today is really around empowering your destination, championing public-private collaboration, maintaining consistency, and more around placemaking, destination development, and ensuring that the experience you promise is the experience that you deliver, and is around creating an experience throughout your destination that's aligned with the story, the narrative, and the territory that you want to own. So how do we do this? What are the tools to get it right? We'll share just a few with the time that we have today. There's obviously many platforms, many frameworks, many best practices that can be shared. There's a lot of resources out there. We've been a partner of City Nation Place since its inception in the Americas, and they have a great resource online with all of the different City Nation Place awards and case studies. So it's a good resource. Place Brand Observer as well as a good resource. They're based in Europe, but we'll share a few tips about how to get your place brand strategy right. And the starting point is really with a brand. Place brand strategy, keyword here is a brand. The consumer side or corporate side of branding would define a brand as the promise of an experience. At its core, that's what a brand is. A brand is the promise of an experience. The reality is, as destination or place brand marketers, we all know that, and the stewards of our destination, we all know that we're not responsible for the experience of visitors, talent, investors through all touch points. If there's a DMO out there who can influence weather patterns or flight delays or potential strike, please let us know. But most of the DMOs or chambers or economic development organization or mayors don't have much influence on some external factors that ultimately impact the experience. So as much as branding is the promise of an experience, what we really wanted to do is share our own definition of what a place brand is. Again, a destination is not Apple, and the tools and the frameworks don't all apply. So we define a place brand as a shared business asset that supports economic growth by improving consistency, differentiation, and destination appeal. What does that mean? So let's start. There are really three keywords here. Let's start with the number one, which is probably the most important. A place brand is a shared business asset. It's shared to be successful, and this is the case of an urban destination. It works for destinations of all sizes, whether it's a district, city, region, country. It needs to be shared. It needs to be shared by, obviously, public sector partners. It needs to be shared by placemaking partners. It needs to be shared by those who are involved in bringing people to the destination. These are universities, these are companies, these are innovation clusters. It needs to be shared by port authorities, airport, if you have them, by civic leaders, by community groups, but probably most importantly, and this is something new in destination branding, it needs to be shared by those that recruit, all the organizations that recruit to your destination, and by companies that export. And that's what a strong destination brand does. Better recruit the right talent and better support the economic landscape in promoting their products and services outside of your destination. This shared asset has to be managed. Unlike the example we just shared of Apple, a destination brand is really not top down. You can't have a chief brand officer or a CM, a chief marketing officer, own the brand. You can't fire a citizen because he doesn't align with your brand values. Whereas in a company, obviously, that's what the top-down approach of branding is meant for. So you need a brand steward, call it brand manager, but it's more of a brand steward that works with these different stakeholders, that facilitates, listens, co-creates with them, advises. His role as a brand steward is really to improve the performance of the brand through alignment. And that's a very important role in a regional branding initiative, is having that person, that brand steward, that can navigate the different organizations and create alignment. Number two, a brand is a shared business asset that supports economic growth. To be successful, you will need to define key KPIs. There are the obvious indirect KPIs that we've talked about for many years: intent to do business, intend to do research, intend to relocate, productivity, investment. But looking at direct KPIs for your destination brand, the most obvious is destination appeal. That can be measured through the image ranking of your destination. Surveying consumers, business leaders, and asking them year after year how they would rank the image of your destination versus competing regions and destinations. Another way to measure the success of a place branding initiative is through what we call brand alignment, the number of on-brand activations, going back to these stakeholders, public sector, civic leaders, private sector, ensuring that there's an alignment in the way they communicate, they market, they recruit when they talk about your destination. Talent conversion also is great. How can your brand help increase talent attraction? So that's a simple KPI to measure. Number of job applications, number of conversions. Retention is another KPI. And a new metric that we're looking at is really how can the brand help destination development? How can the brand help placemaking initiatives? How is the story, how are strategic foundations, our values, our experience principles, how can they help real estate developers, public-private sector partnerships, business improvement districts? How can it help them, give them a framework to deliver a new experience? And that's a new KPI that we're trying to measure in different destinations, and that really aligns branding and destination development. Finally, a brand is really around improving consistency, differentiation, and destination appeal. What is the story? What we want to address here is, what is the story that you want to own? It's not so much a story you want to tell. It's really the story, the narrative that you and only you can own. And every time we start and we support clients on a place branding initiative, we like to go back to this quote from Marcel Moncondes, who's CMO of AB InBev, who says, and I quote, "We need to understand what our brand stands for, and we need to understand what people care about. Whenever there's a clear problem to be addressed in that intersection, this is when we act." So the intersection between our product and our people, product and audience. If we just talk about what we stand for, we're basically talking to ourselves. If we just talk about what people care about, we're just chasing culture. And sometimes brands step into places that they don't belong when they do that. So any brand, and this is obviously in the F&B sector, but every brand, destination brands in particular, need to define that intersection between product and what people care about. We don't really solve that intersection, and these are true examples, with features. Innovation starts here. Third most diversity east of the Mississippi. These are all things we've heard. Our people make us special. Greenest city in our state. Capital of impact. Small city, big ideas. And the list can go on. These are probably true for each of these destinations, but how many other destinations can claim the same features? In what way do you actually own, not tell, own a narrative, own a story? So questions you should be asking yourselves is, what do you stand for? What's your enemy? Who do you really not want to be? How do you want your audience to feel inside of them? How do you want them to feel? Whether it's visitors, talent, investors. These are the same target groups. How do you want them to feel? What unique territory can you own? Going back to Apple, Apple owns simplicity. This drives all of the product development design development, and messaging. It owns that territory, simplicity. How can your brand drive the long-term vision of your community and influence events, placemaking, destination development? What do you empower people to be, people to do? To try to define and respond to these questions, it's very important to start to define your opportunity. Many branding projects probably fail because they go too quickly into the creative development. You're super excited, brought all of many stakeholders together. You have a great partner to help you, and you really drive into the creative development. It's very important to start by defining what is the challenge that you want to solve. Why are you even doing this initiative? And that challenge isn't, I want to attract more visitors or get the right talent. It's really in terms of strategic opportunity. What are your assets that are undervalued? How are you perceived? What is the gap between what you have and the way you're perceived? And that really helps define the opportunity. So we can look at it in 3 different blocks. Number 1 is, what is your product? What makes you stand out? In business strategy, we call that a unique selling point. In destination development, we call that quality of place. So compared to aspiring or similar destinations, similar sizes, what makes you different? But that's not enough to define the opportunity, and that's not enough to define the brand. Because the reality is, maybe what makes you different isn't that important for the people that you're trying to target. So layering in, what is the vision for your destination in your region? Shared by elected officials, shared by major employers, shared by top CEOs, shared by civic organizations, shared by the community. What is the vision for your destination? If the destination in 10 years has a different vision than it is today, if there are big infrastructure and development projects that will reshape your destination, the quality of place today is insufficient. A brand needs to live for the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. So it needs to align with a long-term vision. And finally, factoring in what people care about. Understanding from talent, understanding from consumers, that can be or not visitors, understanding from investors, real estate developers, not only how they perceive your destination, but most importantly, what is important to them? What are the most important attributes for them? And then the opportunity is really understanding this alignment and this gap between the product and your performance, the vision that you share, and the key attributes that help in the decision-making for relocation, travel, vacation, investment. And that really defines this opportunity that you want to talk about. Once you've identified the opportunity, and this is where the creative process starts, it's about defining your personality. And there's a great analogy is looking at cars, right? Most of these products here on this screen are similar. All right, granted, Kia and Rolls-Royce may have separate motors, but most of these products are built the same way, in some cases in the same factories, probably cost about the same price, but have a totally different personality. Someone who drives a Jeep, someone who drives a Lexus, a Volvo, or a Ford will be looking for something different in life and from their cars. Someone who drives a Kia, a Skoda, or an Audi, or a Volkswagen will be looking for something different in life and from their cars. So using this analogy as a destination, what car brand would you be? And then understanding what is the promise of that car brand and how do they want to make you feel? We like to use a tool derived from Jung's archetype. So in psychology, it's really defining motivational attributes and need states for human beings. And we've adapted this Jung's 12 archetypes to destinations and really identify there are 4 major routes you can go. Do you want to promise or address a need state around comfort and ease? Do you want to address a need around joy and inspiration? As a destination, do you want to address a need around intimacy and connection? As a destination, do you want to address a need around new perspectives? Unfortunately, you can't be everything for everyone. And being focused, taking a stand, is how a destination brand can be successful in the long term. You cannot pursue new perspectives, but also pursue comfort and ease. You cannot be an innocent brand and an outlaw brand. You cannot be a creator brand and a jetster brand. So looking at some brands, for example, Apple is a creator brand. BMW is a ruler brand. Volvo is a caregiver. Volvo is all about security. So even though the product of Volvo and BMW may be similar, their brands are very different. Nike is about, Nike's brand strategy is if you have a body, you are an athlete. From this brand purpose, actually, derived their slogan, just do it. Nike is all about you can make it happen, which is why we call it a hero brand. Disney is one of the most famous magician brand archetypes. Virgin, through all of their brands, cruises, airlines, hotels, is really around an outlaw brand. Jeep is around exploration, right? If you purchase a Jeep, if you go in a Jeep, you feel that you'll explore something. So the same applies for destination. And these are some examples of destination brands that own a specific archetype. We've worked with quite a few of them, and this was an interesting exercise on how we've shifted from the personality they thought they had to the personality they needed to have to attract the right audience. So these are a few tips around defining your place brand and process to get it right. Most importantly is, how do you make it last? A lot of place branding initiatives are a 6 to 12-month process, ending up with a probably beautiful logo and tagline, but ending up in a cupboard. A beautiful 500-page PowerPoint presentation that just stays locked in a cupboard. So place brand management is probably the most important aspect of it all. How do you ensure your place brand lives and provides impact? Rule number 1, this is not something that can be done in silo. Not anymore. It was the case 20 years ago. But for the past 10 to 12 years, and most importantly, the past few years, this place branding is called now destination alignment, is called now brand unification, is called now brand management. It's around bringing people together. Successful place brands actually get ink on paper, create a contract, a manifest with different stakeholders. These can be the chamber that represents private sector partners. These can be major employers directly. These can be city, region, state, depending on county, depending on the country you're in. airports and ports, major civic organizations as well. It's about creating a manifest together with partners. Doesn't mean everyone funds it, and we'll get into that in a minute, but it means that everyone is aligned and everyone is on board. They may have diverging visions, and navigating these different perspectives and visions is part of the place brand manager or steward's role, but it's important to have them understand the objective and the vision behind this place brand. Rule number 2, the toolkit. So this beautiful brand book or messaging playbook that destinations crave, and rightly so, is usually the end of a process. But it's actually the beginning. Implementation and management of the place brand goes through education, sharing this toolkit with multiple stakeholders and partners involved, whether they're selling, marketing, recruiting, in hospitality, in events, in sports, in innovation or tech, whether they're trying to get students, professors, young graduates, it doesn't matter. It's all about educating them, working with them, and figuring out how the brand can help them better sell, better market, better recruit. So the toolkit is really just the beginning. The third rule is about being accountable, basically. It's traditionally, it's been hard to measure performance of a brand. You measure marketing performance very easily because you have marketing dollars behind media campaigns. So you can measure number of views, number of engagement, level of engagement, number of overnight stays, etc., through marketing dollars. But how do you actually measure the performance of the brand and why you've done this initiative? Well, you can measure it, through working together on coordinated research, level of alignment, which we've talked about before, how everyone can speak with one voice, supporting HR efforts, maybe even through supporting exports, growing franchises, developing partnerships. A lot of destinations are developing now ambassador programs in different regions and around the world that can relay the values and the personality of your destination. So these are all tools that they're a natural extension of your place brand, and that the place brand can help catalyze. Obviously, the answer is rarely a logo. That's not what place branding is about. Some destinations choose to have a unified visual identity, some not, but that really doesn't matter so much. It's about how do you support your region's recruiters, your region's businesses, your region's hospitality partners in being more successful and productive. Rule number 4, this is pretty obvious. Place branding is not a start and end process. It's not a 6 to 12 month process. This is an ongoing process that does require investment, that requires resources to manage. So it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. One thing that's important is thinking about how can this initiative outlive elections? And this is tricky. This is tricky because you need support from senior government officials to launch a successful place brand. But you need to ensure that this brand can live without this support in the long run. So from the start, thinking about how can your place brand initiative outlive elections. And finally, there's no right model and there is no wrong model. So it's not because a community, a city, a region, country that has developed this place brand model that you should follow it. You're unique. That's what your brand is about. That's what your narrative and story is about. And the model that you choose really depends on many different factors. You know, the regional and local governance, the business and social fabric. What are the needs in terms of marketing, recruitment from private sector partners? Depends on funding, right? Is this funded by local or regional government? Is this funded by the private sector? Is this funded by hotel tax, visitation tax? Does it need to include your community? Maybe, maybe not. What are the needs of the residents? So the actual model and governance model of your place brand depends on many, many different factors, and there's no one size fits all. So in order to summarize everything, and then we have, I think, about 20 minutes for questions. You know, place branding today is really around economic growth. It's more about destination alignment, organizational governance, than it is about marketing. It captures your personality, it's unique, and addresses your target audience needs. What do the people that you're targeting want, or what do they need? It drives result through collaboration and internal alignment. It's a long-term process, and there's no one model fits all. All right, well, thank you all. I think we can add some questions or chat in the Q&A, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Tom, you're probably more expert in Zoom and knowing how we can make this work. Maybe people can ask.
Yeah, let's just have questions in the Q&A. And Jeremie, if you want to read them out, or I can read them out. But why don't we commence? I see a couple of people have asked questions. I guess maybe while people are typing questions into the Q&A, I've got one for you that can start. First of all, will this be available as a recording? The answer is yes. So yeah, we will be making this this masterclass available to all registrants, and it will also live on our YouTube channel next week. And if you're subscribed to our newsletter, and you can subscribe at resonanceco.com/newsletter, then you'll be getting it directly in your inbox next week. Some of the other questions related that we've got people here that have contributed is, as you've said, place branding has evolved massively over the past 20 years. What do the next 20 look like? And this one is from Georgie Cooling. That's a great question, Georgie.
Well, it's probably $1 million question, right? It's difficult to know what the future holds. You can easily understand the past, but I think more and more there's an integration around the narrative and the story you have and the actual experience that you offer. And that's the evolution in consumer branding as well, right? From identity to actual experience. So place branding is going to follow the same trend. And the way the place brand is managed today, it's usually managed by marketing teams from DMOs. It's probably going to be managed in the future by destination development teams or placemaking teams. And so more and more, the place brand will really help define the way we envision investments for destinations and for regions.
Great. We have one from John Taylor. Although there is no one right model, what are the pros and cons of having the process led from within the city or by an external partner like a chamber, for example?
It's a really good question. And there's great success in both and great failures in both. In most cases, the chamber is a strategic partner. It's rare, though it happens, that the chamber leads the process. In most cases, it's a partner. One of the reasons is that city agencies or city governments have more funds to develop these types of programs than a chamber has. The benefit of having this project led by a chamber, for example, is that it's apolitical. So again, it can sustain long-term, irrespective of elections and governments. That's one key benefit. One con is that chambers are basically financed by their members. Obviously, it's their member-based organization. So you're working directly for your members and only your members. So this can be tricky in the sense that a brand must be holistic, must really act as a business catalyst for all companies, all organizations in your destination. And so you have to ensure that even if this is led by the chamber, it's not limited to benefiting only the partners.
That's great. Okay, we have another one, another question. In the context of a smaller town where everyone knows everyone, how do you get people on board with a place brand initiative?
Not sure I understand the question. Process is similar, whether it's small town or large city. It's about alignment. So it's about bringing people on board. I think one of the things with a small town is, what is your opportunity as a town to create this brand? Is it something internal for citizen pride, which is usually the case for a small town, versus external to attract talent and investment? So the process is different, whether it's mostly internally focused, you need to generate pride from your community, or whether this is external facing. The process is the same, and navigating different perspectives and visions is always one of the hardest and most complex aspects of place branding.
Okay, great. Yeah, kind of a similar vein here. Another question: how should we work our way around the city versus national brand?
Well, depends on the countries and depends on the cities. Some cities have stronger brand values than their countries, and we work a lot with Brussels, for example, and Brussels has a stronger brand than Belgium. On the other hand, some countries, for example, Switzerland, is a much stronger brand than the different cities within Switzerland, such as Geneva, Bern, or Zurich. So first of all, it really depends on the country and the city. It's difficult to imagine that, and I think New Zealand is probably the only example that has done that, where regional brands really tie up to the national narrative. It could be the case for very small countries like Luxembourg, for example, which is a city in a country. But most of the cases, the brands don't necessarily ladder up. The way things work in the US and the way things work in Europe and most developed economies, you have a city brand, you have a regional or state brand, and then you have the country brand. And these three brands have different purposes. The country brand is really around international, it's really around like FDI and exports and international appeal. Regional brands is really within the country and bordering countries. And the city brand is basically competitive within different cities of your same country? So it's a great question. It's a complicated, there's no strict answers. It really depends on what country and what city we're talking about.
That's great. I just gotta say, you're like completely dancing on a tightrope with no harness. You did not see these questions in advance, so great job so far. Okay, we've got another one here. Is there a blended model or a cross-sectoral advisory board approach to outreach?
Sorry, say again. I can't even read the question.
Is there a blended model or a cross-sectoral advisory board approach?
You usually need a cross-sectoral steering committee or advisory board. When we talked about bringing public and private sector partners together from the start, that's key to the success of a regional branding initiative. Again, today, a place brand is not a tourism brand. It's not an economic development brand only. It's not a sports brand. It's really a unifying vision and territory that you can own that can drive the development of your destination. So you really need to bring the best people together. That's the answer, is the best people that best represent the diversity of your destination. And again, every destination is different. So, in some cases, it'll be totally different members than in other cases. So steering committee is very important. You probably have different levels. You probably create an advisory group. And this is a broader group, more stakeholders involved. And then a steering committee that's probably a smaller group, less stakeholders involved. But advisory groups can probably have 20 to 25 different organizations. Steering committee, probably 5 to 7.
Wonderful. Okay, we've got a question for you in particular, given that you've led this project, is Lindsay McNeish. She would love to hear you talk more about Brussels as a place brand example, the overall process, lessons learned, etc. I know it's a tall order because it was such a massive project, but maybe just the highlights for Lindsay.
Yeah, I mean, in a couple minutes, and happy to connect with all of you separately. We'll share my email and we can hop on a call. But we started the project. We partnered with Ipsos. That was a couple of years ago in 2021, summer 2021, to do broad research in Europe. And what we unpacked was that the performance of Brussels in terms of quality of place was way higher than its image perception. So there was a big gap between the actual product and experience that the region offered versus the way it was perceived. So we knew that the strategic opportunity was really the perception gap, the image. And in order to create a new image, we had to go deviate from the proposition around Europe's capital, because that didn't really resonate with consumers and business decision leaders. It's a great attribute to have, but you can't create a whole story on being Europe's capital. So what we learned was that Brussels was Europe's most diverse city, but what that really meant was that it was Europe's most welcoming. So we created a strategic platform in Brussels, We Dare You to Be Yourself, that reflected the welcoming aspect of Brussels. That's a city where whoever you are, you will feel welcome. So that's a very short summary, but happy to talk about it in more detail.
That's great. Yeah, and Jeremie is at jfeinblatt@resonanceco.com. So first initial, his last name at resonanceco.com. So any additional questions that we don't get to, please reach out to him directly. Yeah, he'll include it now. Okay, wonderful. And some more questions here. How did COVID impact place branding process, and did destinations need to pivot their messaging? This is from John One. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, John.
To be honest, I don't think so, because a place brand is a long-term vision. So there are disruptions to that vision, and COVID certainly impacted a lot of things, especially when it comes to visitation and tourism. But if you look at major place brands that were launched before COVID, they haven't really shifted their narrative or their positioning during or after COVID. So I think that, you know, in a world with a lot of uncertainties, one of the things we can be positive about is that a strong brand can outlive these uncertainties. And this is really a long-term vision for your destination. So tactical marketing was impacted, of course, by COVID, but the long-term vision and story you want to tell the world shouldn't have been. And your personality should not have been.
Great. Okay. There's another question. Is it more effective to include physical or digital stakeholder processes during the development of a place brand?
Combination of both really depends. Some people are easier to speak to via Zoom or Teams because they have super busy schedules. If you want to create focus groups, sectoral focus groups on tourism or innovation or key clusters in your region, it's probably more impactful to do it in person. But I would say combination of both, best of both worlds.
Great. There's also another question here, but it looks like the concept of place brand and place brand development is heavily dependent on the essence of product marketing. How do we make sure this is addressing the complexity of what places are constructed from naturally?
Not sure I understand exactly the question. I think the history of a place is fundamental to its DNA and to its product today. So places constructed naturally, I think that addresses this. But, and we talked about this in the presentation, you factor in your product and quality of place, but that's just one side of the equation. You have to understand how this ties back to how you're perceived and what people care about. You create a brand for people, you don't create a brand for yourself. So you shouldn't just talk about yourself and your features. You should interest your target audiences, which is why it's that intersection that's really important that we talked about. Being true to your DNA, of course, is key. But ensuring that you convey that DNA and capture it with a personality, value proposition, benefits that people actually care about is fundamental.
That's great. Just a couple of questions here we'll combine regarding just smaller destinations. And by that, you know, instead of cities, districts. So Amy Gutman asks, can you talk a little bit about various downtowns and CBDs are using place branding as a strategy tied to the return to the office, corporate real estate vacancies, and really post-COVID revitalization? That's a great question.
Yeah, hey, Amy. I think that's when we talk about place branding and place making, that's where business improvement districts and real estate developers have a lot to say. I think that they need to ladder up to the overarching city brand or story that you want to tell, or basically experience that people want to have, but they can apply it to their specific way. And talking about, you know, diversity of neighborhoods, talking about reconverting office space, transforming office space, all that is part of a really strong district identity. So in the future, bids and districts will probably be much more active in place branding than they have in the past. And there's a really strong opportunity for them to reclaim district-led narrative.
Right. And of course, this would not be a masterclass or a webinar in 2024 without an AI question. So Elena, thank you for making sure we have that checked off our list. So Elena says, hi, Jeremie, thanks for an insightful presentation. How do you see technology like AI play a role in place branding or defining place branding success?
I think no one really knows how AI will shape the way we work tomorrow. We've seen a lot of large creative groups using AI as insights generator. So that's, as we talk about place branding and the brand strategy approach of place branding, AI will certainly be helpful in the short term to develop insights, develop multiple, messaging scenarios, support on the storytelling aspect. The reality is generative AI today is based on historical and past. Branding is a lot based on the future and the vision for tomorrow. So there are probably limits to what AI will do. I don't believe that AI can do it alone, but I think it's gonna help a lot in the process. With regards to what's gonna happen in 5 or 10 years, I have no clue, and I think that we're all learning day by day how AI will change the way we work in the future.
Great. All right, we've got a couple of minutes left here, so keep those questions coming in, but we've got a bunch here. So the next one is from Pablo Borchi. Pablo says, do you have any thoughts on how cities brand themselves as music cities and the impact on their destination marketing? For example, comparing Austin versus Nashville versus Macon, Georgia.
So, I think music cities is one part of cultural cities. Destinations have branded themselves as culture cities for a long time, and one of the best examples in the 90s was Berlin. Sydney and Bilbao totally transformed when they had their opera and Guggenheim Museum. So, music is a part of culture, and so Nashville has been really successful. Cleveland as well is a good example of music cities. I think there's another question we should think of when talking about music cities is how do you associate the sounds with your city? When you create an impactful message, what is the soundtrack of your city? And that's really interesting in the way you want to sell your city. Can you create a unique soundtrack that really conveys, it's called sonic branding, and that really conveys the values and your identity and the identity of the city. But I think anything cultural, music is part of quality of life. Anything related to culture and music is something that appeals to a diverse audience set. So is always a strong attribute to a destination brand. Should most cities brand themselves around music city? Most likely not, but some have done it successful, and it was a smart move.
Wonderful. Okay, I think we have time for one more, and it's a good one from Amna Mashauer. Thank you so much for a couple of your questions, Amna. I hope we got to that first one okay. So Amna asks, how do you see the facility and property management practices intersect with place branding? And how do these new technologies empower place brand practitioners recently? So kind of a question about property management and what sounds like more of that private sector and their role in place branding, which I know you touched on. I know not a lot of time, but go.
No, it's a super relevant question, and again, this is an inclusive process. Again, depending on regions and cities, but in some instances where the large property managers manage a lot of assets, whether these are residential, mixed use, or office or retail, that is part of the experience. When you look at the customer journey, whether it's talent, investors, visitors, that is part of the experience. So you need to work with them, and they need to be involved in the co-creation process of the brand. Again, this is not a top-down process. They need to be involved in the co-creation of the brand, and they need to align with it. So the experience that they provide is aligned with the overarching destination experience and destination story. So no, property managers, real estate developers, all of these groups are fundamental to the process.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jeremie. That'll do it for this masterclass. A reminder to everybody that we are going to be doing these quarterly. So follow us on LinkedIn at Resonance Co. Make sure you subscribe to our newsletter at resonanceco.com/newsletter, just to be up to date on everything we've got going on. We love educating the industry and our colleagues. And as Jeremie said, his email is right there in the chat if you've got any questions to follow up on. And this will be available as a recording to you later this week and on our YouTube channels next week. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks all.